The coat did not belong in that lobby. That was the first thing the concierge noticed when Elliot Marsh walked through the revolving doors of the Harrington Grand on a Tuesday morning in late November. The coat was a Carhartt, olive green, faded at the elbows, the kind of jacket that had spent more time on job sites than in coat checks. Beneath it, Elliot wore a plain flannel shirt, dark jeans, and work boots that still had dried mud along the heel from the weekend before. He carried no briefcase, no rolling suitcase, just a worn canvas messenger bag slung across one shoulder and a manila folder tucked under his arm that he kept adjusting every few steps as though worried it might fall. He stopped just inside the entrance and looked around the way people do when they are trying very hard not to look lost. The Harrington Grand in downtown Halifax had opened 3 years earlier and had not lost a single star, since its lobby floor was Italian marble. Its ceilings were 17 feet high, hung with custom chandeliers that cast everything in the color of warm honey. The front desk stretched the full length of one wall, staffed by 4 employees in matching charcoal blazers with gold pins on their lapels. Every surface in that lobby had been chosen specifically to communicate one thing. Not everyone belongs here. Elliot Marsh looked like he belonged somewhere else entirely. He approached the front desk. He gave his name quietly. Explained he was there for the 9 o'clock stakeholder meeting, the one organized by the Provincial Infrastructure Working Group. The man behind the desk, young, with the careful smile of someone trained to be polite in the exact degree required and no further, glanced at his screen, then at Elliot, then at the screen again. "And your affiliation?" the man asked. "Independent, I'm a structural consultant." Another glance, the kind that takes in the coat, the boots, the messenger bag, and makes a quiet calculation. One moment. What happened in the next 4 minutes is the kind of thing that nobody puts in the official record. It doesn't appear in meeting minutes, it doesn't get mentioned in the debrief, but 3 employees witnessed it, and 2 of them still talk about it. Sandra Beaumont-Price, the hotel's director of guest experience, had been moving through the lobby on her usual morning circuit when she noticed Elliot standing at the desk. Sandra was 51 years old, had been in luxury hospitality for 26 of those years, and had developed over that time a finely calibrated sense of who enhanced the atmosphere of a space, and who, in her private assessment, complicated it. She wore her dark hair pinned back, her blazer pressed to a crease you could read a ruler by, and she carried herself with the authority of someone who had personally resolved 340 guest complaints, without ever once raising her voice. She approached the desk, exchanged a brief look with the young concierge, the kind of wordless exchange that only happens in workplaces where hierarchy is fully understood, and then spoke directly to Elliot. She told him, with complete pleasantness, that the stakeholder session had a separate check-in, located on the conference level, and that perhaps he had entered through the wrong door. She gestured toward the service corridor entrance on the north side of the building. She did not ask his name. She did not check the guest list herself. She simply redirected him, the way you redirect someone who has wandered somewhere they did not intend to go. Elliot looked at her for a moment, then he nodded, thanked her, and walked back toward the revolving doors. He did not go to the service entrance. He stood outside on the granite steps in the November air, his breath making small clouds, and he made a phone call. The call lasted 45 seconds. Then he put his phone back in his coat pocket, looked up at the facade of the hotel, and went back inside. This time, he walked directly to the elevator bank, pressed the button for the conference level, and rode up alone. He was 7 minutes early for the meeting. To understand why that Tuesday mattered, you have to understand the 18 months that came before it. Elliot Marsh was 42 years old. He had grown up in Dartmouth, the son of a welder and a school secretary, and he had studied civil engineering at Dalhousie, on a combination of scholarships and weekend construction work. He was not the most naturally gifted student in his program. There were people who grasped the mathematics faster, people who talked more fluently in seminars, but there was something his professors noticed that didn't always come attached to brilliance. Elliot Marsh saw things other people missed. He looked at plans, and immediately found the friction point, the load assumption that didn't account for real-world variance, the detail that would become a problem in year 12 of a 20-year structure. He built a quiet, solid practice over 15 years, mostly public infrastructure, bridges, overpasses, a water treatment expansion outside Antigonish. He was not famous in his field, he was trusted, which in that field counts for more. Then, 3 years before the Tuesday at the Harrington Grand, his wife Joanna died of a brain aneurysm on a Saturday afternoon in April. She had been gardening, she was 39, their daughter, Clara, was 6 years old. Elliot took 4 months off. When he came back to work, he came back different. Not broken, but altered in the particular way that grief alters people who keep going anyway. He was quieter, he moved through his days with careful economy. He did not talk about Joanna at work. He had a photograph of her on his desk at home. In the room where he worked after Clara was asleep, and sometimes when he was stuck on a problem at 11 o'clock at night, he would look at it for a while before he found the answer. Clara was 9 now. She had her mother's laugh and her father's habit of going silent when she was thinking hard about something. Every morning, Elliot made her breakfast, drove her to school, then drove to whatever site or office the day required. Every afternoon, he was in the school parking lot before the bell rang. He had not missed a pickup in 3 years. This is not mentioned to make him seem heroic. It's mentioned because it's true. The contract on the table that November was the largest of Elliot's career. The province of Nova Scotia was 6 months into a crisis, involving a series of aging highway interchange structures along the Trans-Canada Corridor. 3 engineering firms had reviewed the primary problem. A combination of thermal expansion design flaws and inadequate drainage coefficients in the original 1970s construction, and 3 firms had proposed solutions that the provincial working group's own technical advisor had quietly flagged as insufficient. The structures were rated to handle specific load tolerances that no longer reflected actual traffic volumes. The math was, depending on how generous you were being, either outdated or dangerous. Elliot had been brought in as an independent reviewer 6 weeks earlier, on the recommendation of a retired engineer named Douglas Kerr, who had worked with him on a bridge replacement project outside Truro. He had spent those 6 weeks going through records, running his own calculations, and finding something that none of the 3 firms had found. A cumulative resonance issue in 2 of the interchange structures that, under a specific combination of temperature and traffic load, produced vibration frequencies that were slowly compromising the rebar bonding in the concrete decking. It was subtle. It would not have been obvious in a standard review. It was the kind of thing you found only if you were looking at the problem from a slightly different angle than everyone else had been looking from. His solution was not the cheapest option available. It was also the only one that actually addressed what was happening. The Tuesday meeting was the presentation to the full working group. 11 members, including 3 deputy ministers, 2 structural engineers from the provincial department, and a senior consultant from the federal infrastructure file. Elliot's was the last presentation of the morning. He had prepared it himself, on his laptop, sitting at his kitchen table after Clara was in bed. The presentation was clean and direct. It used no more slides than the information required. There were no decorative graphics. He had ironed his flannel shirt the night before, which he recognized, with some private amusement, was the most he was willing to do. The conference room on the 14th floor of the Harrington Grand had floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the harbor. The water that morning was slate-gray and calm. Around the table sat the 11 members of the working group, plus 2 support staff. Coffee had been poured. A small breakfast spread, pastries, fruit, bottled water, occupied one end of a credenza along the wall. Elliot took a seat at the far end of the table and set up his laptop without speaking to anyone. The 2 presentations before his ran over time. By the time the working group chair, a deputy minister named Ronald Fitzgibbon, introduced him, it was closer to 10:30. Elliot stood up. He did not apologize for the time, he did not begin with pleasantries, he simply began. What followed was 40 minutes that several people in that room would later describe, in conversation, as the clearest technical explanation they had ever witnessed in a government context. Elliot did not simplify, he did not condescend, he explained the resonance issue with the same directness he would have used talking to another engineer. And he trusted that the people in the room would follow him. And they did. Because when someone speaks with genuine authority, the room naturally adjusts to meet it. He showed them where the existing proposals fell short, not with criticism, just with data. The numbers did not argue, they simply were. Then he showed them his solution. The cost was 15% higher than the second highest proposal. The projected lifespan extension was 40 years longer. The risk reduction, expressed in actuarial terms, was not close. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. The first question came from a structural engineer named Brenda Moreau, from the provincial department. She had been taking notes throughout, and she asked about the resonance frequency modeling. Specifically, whether his calculations accounted for the asymmetric load distribution during winter maintenance operations, when one lane was typically closed for several hours at a time. Elliot had accounted for it. He pulled up the relevant slide, walked her through the numbers. More questions came. He answered all of them, not one hesitation, not one deflection. 40 minutes after he had stood up, Ronald Fitzgibbon set down his pen and said quietly, "I think we all know what we're looking at." There were nods around the table. "Before we discuss next steps," Fitzgibbon said, "is there anything you need from us in terms of proceeding to formal proposal stage?" Elliot thought for a moment. "I'll need to be able to get Clara by 3:15, he said. "She has a piano lesson at 4. There was a brief pause. One of the deputy ministers smiled. "I think we can accommodate that," Fitzgibbon said. Here is what was happening downstairs while Elliot was finishing his presentation. Sandra Beaumont-Price had returned to her office off the lobby, where she spent the next 2 hours on standard morning operations. Reviewing guest feedback from the overnight, signing off on a staffing schedule, taking a call with the food and beverage manager about a banquet event that weekend. She was good at her job. She ran her department with consistency and care, and the hotel's guest satisfaction scores in her division were among the highest the property had recorded. At 11:45, she received a call from the Conference Services Coordinator on 14. The coordinator explained that the Provincial Infrastructure Working Group had concluded their session and that their lead, independent consultant, the one they were planning to retain for the formal contract, had mentioned, in passing, that when he'd arrived that morning, he'd been redirected toward the service entrance by a member of the lobby staff. The coordinator's voice was careful and neutral. She was simply relaying information. Sandra set down her pen. She asked the coordinator to repeat the description of the consultant: olive green jacket, canvas bag, work boots. The man at the desk that morning. Sandra sat with this information for approximately 30 seconds. Then she stood up, straightened her blazer and walked out to the lobby. She asked the young concierge, whose name was Tyler, to pull up the guest registration for the infrastructure event. She found Elliot's name on the list. He had been on it the entire time. She went back to her office and sat down again. In 26 years of hospitality, Sandra Beaumont-Price had navigated complaints from professional athletes, sitting politicians, and at least one internationally recognized conductor, who had very specific feelings about pillow firmness. She had maintained composure through events that would have flattened people with less discipline. This was different. This was not a mistake born of someone else's error, or a circumstance outside her control. She had made a judgment call with no information, based entirely on what a man looked like, and she had been wrong in a way that had a direct and documentable consequence. She took out a notepad. She wrote down what had happened, in her own handwriting, including her own role, including the part where she had not checked the list. Then she walked to the elevator and rode up to 14. Elliot was in the hallway outside the conference room when she found him. The meeting had wrapped. A few working group members were still milling around, exchanging cards. Elliot was putting his laptop back into his messenger bag, the way someone does when they're already thinking about what comes next. Sandra approached him. She introduced herself by name and title. She said she was the person who had redirected him that morning. Elliot looked at her. She did not offer a corporate apology. She did not use the passive construction, the if you felt language, the that was not our intention language. She said plainly that she had looked at him and made an assumption without checking, and that it was wrong, and that she was sorry. There was a moment of quiet. Elliot said, "I appreciate that." Not warmly, not coldly, simply. He zipped up his bag and settled the strap on his shoulder. He said he needed to get downstairs. He had a parking meter to sort out. Sandra said the hotel would cover any parking charges that had accumulated. Elliot said that wasn't necessary. Then he paused, and with the faint trace of something that might have been a smile, he said it was a $2 meter and he'd probably just pay it himself. He nodded to her, and walked to the elevator. Ronald Fitzgibbon, the deputy minister, found out about the lobby incident that afternoon. The working group's administrative coordinator had overheard part of Sandra's conversation with the conference services team and mentioned it to him. He sent a brief note to the hotel's general manager. Not a complaint, more of an observation. The general manager took it seriously. Within the week, Sandra's entire lobby welcome protocol, the training, the criteria for directing visitors, the approach to first contact assessment, was being reviewed. Sandra did not lose her job, she was not asked to, but she redesigned the protocol herself, because it was the correct thing to do and because she knew it. The new version is still in place. It does not allow staff to redirect guests based on visual assessment without first cross-referencing the event guest list. Small changes. The kind that happen quietly and stick. The formal contract between Elliot Marsh, independent structural consultant, and the province of Nova Scotia, was signed 8 weeks after the Harrington Grand Meeting. The value of the engagement was the largest of his career, by a significant margin. Over the following fiscal year, his analysis and remediation plan for the Trans-Canada interchange structures would be cited by the Federal Infrastructure Advisory Office as a model for proactive risk assessment in aging corridor systems. He did not read the citation until his firm's administrative contact forwarded it to him 3 months after it was published. He read it, at his kitchen table at 7 in the morning, while Clara ate toast across from him, and told him about a book she was reading about migratory birds. He told her that was interesting. She said she was thinking maybe she wanted to be an ornithologist. He said that was a good word to know. She said she already knew it. He laughed. The full, unguarded kind that doesn't happen on purpose. And she laughed too, because she had been waiting for it. The Carhartt coat still hangs by the front door of their house in Dartmouth. Clara, when she was small, used to use one of its large pockets to store things she found outside. Smooth stones, interesting bark, a jay feather once that she kept for a year. The pocket still has a faint mark from a piece of chalk she left in it the previous spring. Elliot has been offered, on 3 separate occasions by people trying to be thoughtful, a clothing budget as part of a consulting retainer. He has declined each time, not stubbornly, but simply. The coat is warm. It was his father's before it was his. It has been on every major site he has ever worked. Some things carry history that has nothing to do with price. There is a photograph on his desk, the one of Joanna, the one he has looked at on late nights, when answers were slow to come. In the photograph she is standing in the backyard in April, squinting a little into the sun, holding a trowel. She is laughing at something that happened, just before the shutter clicked, something only the two of them knew. Elliot still drives Clara to school every morning. He is still in the parking lot before the bell rings every afternoon. He has not missed a pickup in 3 years, and he does not intend to. Some routines are not routines at all, they are the whole point. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that what someone wears or drives has never once determined what they're worth, pass it on to someone who needs to hear that today. And if you've ever been the person in the wrong coat in the wrong lobby, this one was for you.